Kwaku lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling. The night air was still, only interrupted by the distant cries of a lone night bird. It had been weeks since he last had a good night's sleep. His insomnia had returned with a vengeance, and the countless cups of herbal tea and meditation exercises offered no relief. His body was heavy with exhaustion, but his mind refused to shut down. Thoughts raced through his head, spinning tales of worry and fear, keeping him on edge. As the minutes ticked by, he grew restless, tossing and turning, trying to find a comfortable position. Eventually, he turned on his side and gazed out of his bedroom window. His eyes settled on two bright streetlights in the distance. Their warm yellow glow cut through the darkness, soft and steady, casting long shadows on the ground. Something about the lights calmed his racing mind. He focused on them, letting his eyes rest. Slowly, his eyelids grew heavier, and before long, he was drifting into a deep, dreamless sleep. The following night, Kwaku's insomnia returned. He lay in bed, frustration bubbling inside him as he stared at the dark ceiling. He remembered the streetlights from the night before and how easily he had fallen asleep. Turning on his side, he searched for their comforting glow. There they were, still standing tall and bright against the darkness. He let his eyes rest on them once more, their yellow light bringing an unexpected sense of peace. Minutes passed, and his eyes grew heavy again. He yawned, feeling the familiar pull of sleep. Slowly, his mind began to quiet, the worries of the day fading away. For the first time in weeks, Kwaku found a sense of calm. He closed his eyes and let sleep take over. In the morning, he awoke feeling rested and refreshed, a rare smile touching his lips as he remembered the peaceful sleep he'd had. Kwaku began to look forward to the nights. Every evening, after his fruitless attempts to fall asleep, he would turn on his side and find the streetlights. They became his anchor, his beacon in the dark hours. Each night, their steady glow soothed him, easing him into slumber. His sleepless nights became less frequent, and he started to feel more like his old self again. He found himself wondering why he had never noticed those streetlights before. They must have always been there, yet he could not recall a single time he had paid them any attention. No matter, he was grateful for their presence now. With their help, he managed to find a rhythm. He began to sleep better, waking up with a clear head and renewed energy. One night, Kwaku's old enemy returned. He lay awake, tossing and turning, his mind refusing to calm. With a sigh, he turned on his side and looked out the window. The streetlights were there, as always, but tonight something was different. They were flickering. Every few seconds, the lights would dim and then brighten again. Kwaku frowned, his brow furrowing in concern. He hoped the bulbs were not burning out. He tried to focus on the flickering lights, hoping they would still lull him to sleep. Despite their inconsistency, they provided a sense of comfort. As his eyes grew heavy, the lights continued to flicker, dimming more frequently. He closed his eyes, allowing sleep to wash over him, even as the streetlights finally went dark. Morning came, and Kwaku woke feeling refreshed. Stretching lazily, he remembered the flickering lights from the night before. He made his way to the window, looking out towards the spot where the streetlights should have been. The daylight revealed the road and the surrounding buildings clearly, but something was wrong. There were no streetlights. He blinked in confusion, leaning closer to the window to get a better view. The street was empty, devoid of any lamppost. Kwaku's heart skipped a beat. How could he have been so wrong? He was certain he had seen them every night. He rubbed his eyes, thinking perhaps he was still dreaming. But as he looked again, there were no streetlights, only the empty street stretching out in front of him. A shiver ran down his spine. How had he been falling asleep by staring at lights that didn't exist? Kwaku's confusion quickly turned to unease. As he scanned the scene outside his window, he noticed something else that made his blood run cold. Small, deep claw marks marked the wooden sill of his window. They were fresh, the wood splintered and raw. The claw marks trailed along the edge as if something had been perched there, right outside his room, looking in. His heart pounded in his chest as he reached out to touch the marks, feeling the rough grooves under his fingertips. It was impossible. There had to be a logical explanation. Perhaps a stray cat had found its way up to his window, scratching at the wood. But as he looked at the marks again, he knew they were too deep, too deliberate. Whatever had left those marks was no ordinary animal. A chill ran down his spine, and he felt the first stirrings of fear. The mystery of the streetlights and the claw marks consumed Kwaku's thoughts. He couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in his gut. That night, as he lay in bed, sleep eluded him. The darkness felt oppressive, pressing in from all sides. He tried to resist the urge to look out of the window, but curiosity got the better of him. Slowly, he turned on his side, half expecting to see the streetlights shining brightly. Instead, he was met with darkness. The streetlights were gone. The familiar comforting glow was nowhere to be found. His heart pounded as he stared into the blackness. He waited, hoping to see the flicker of light, but nothing happened. The street outside remained dark and empty. Kwaku lay awake for hours, his mind racing with questions. Who, or what, had he been seeing? As the days passed, Kwaku's insomnia worsened. His nights were spent in restless fear, and his days were filled with anxious dread. He began to feel as though he was being watched, a constant prickling sensation at the back of his neck. He would glance over his shoulder, expecting to see someone standing there, but he was always alone. The claw marks on his windowsill became an obsession. He would run his fingers over them, feeling the deep grooves in the wood, trying to imagine what kind of creature could have made them. The nights were the worst. The darkness felt alive, pressing in from all sides. He could almost hear it whispering, faint voices just out of earshot. He knew it was only his imagination, but the fear was real. He would lie in bed, his eyes wide open, staring into the darkness. Sleep was a distant memory. He felt himself slipping into a fog of exhaustion, his thoughts becoming jumbled and confused. Desperate for answers, Kwaku decided to visit the village elders. They were the keepers of the old stories, the guardians of wisdom. If anyone could help him understand what was happening, it would be them. He made his way to the elders' compound, the morning sun casting long shadows on the ground. As he approached, he could see the elders gathered under the shade of a large tree, their faces lined with age and wisdom. Kwaku explained his situation, describing the streetlights, the claw marks, and his growing fear. The elders listened in silence, their expressions grave. When he finished, there was a long pause. Finally, one of the elders spoke, his voice low and serious. "You have been visited by the Nyamatsatse, the night watchers," he said. "They are spirits that wander the darkness, seeking those who are lost. They can take many forms, often appearing as lights to lure their victims. You must be careful, Kwaku. The Nyamatsatse do not take kindly to those who ignore their warnings." The elder's words echoed in Kwaku's mind as he walked home. The Nyamatsatse were creatures of legend, spirits of the night that fed on fear. They were said to be able to mimic light, using it to lure their victims into the darkness. Once they had their prey, they would leave behind marks as a warning, signs that they were not to be ignored. Kwaku shivered, remembering the claw marks on his windowsill. Could it be true? Could the Nyamatsatse have been watching him? He had always thought of the old stories as nothing more than tales to scare children. But now, as he thought about the flickering lights and the sense of being watched, he was no longer so sure. The elders had warned him to be careful, but how could he protect himself from something he couldn't see? The fear settled deeper in his chest, a heavy weight that refused to lift. That night, Kwaku couldn't bring himself to look out of the window. The darkness outside felt alive, pulsing with unseen threats. He kept his eyes shut tight, his heart pounding in his chest. He could almost feel the darkness pressing against the glass, whispering to him, calling his name. The silence was unbearable, stretching on.